Hi, this is the Research Like a Pro question and answer series, and I'm Nicole Dyer. In this clip, Diana Elder walks us through the core essentials of source analysis using a real life genealogy case study. She breaks down how to properly classify your sources, evaluate an informant's credibility, and distinguish between direct and indirect evidence. Then you'll get to see those concepts in action as she untangles a tough brick wall involving a 19th century land lottery, an unexpected divorce, and conflicting dates. Whether you are dealing with records that don't seem to line up or you're wondering how to take years of scattered research and turn it into a written report, this lesson will show you step by step how to resolve conflicts, correlate your facts, and confidently write up a solid case study. Let's dive in.
Today, as we talk about source analysis, I thought I would share a mini case study. And this is from some of my research that I probably talked about before or written a little bit about before, but it has so many good pieces of source analysis and how things can fit together that I thought we would do this. And of course, we can discuss it and, we can answer any questions about that. But I thought, first of all, we would do a little bit of just a review about source analysis. So I asked my friend Claude to give me some key points of source analysis, and I asked it to use Evidence Explained that's on Elizabeth Schoenmill's website, Research Like a Pro, things that we've written about, and then any other sources. And I thought this came up with a pretty nice selection of points. So, as we know, and part of the Research Like a Pro process is to look at our sources and we classify each source before trusting it. I think that's a really key point. Sometimes we find information and we're just not sure if it's ours or not. So, this analysis can help us with that. So, we try to decide, is it original, derivative, or an authored narrative? Mm. And then we have to think about information, and that involves identifying the informant. And then we have to try to figure out if their knowledge that they're informing on was firsthand or secondhand. And if we just can't do that, then it's undetermined information. We have no idea. Now, we pull evidence from this information, and sometimes that evidence is direct. It just clearly tells us the answer to our research query, and other times there are a lot of things that come together, indirect evidence. And so often we have to do the step of analyzing and correlating evidence across multiple records. Sometimes we have a very simple question like when did a couple get married? And then we have their marriage record stating a date. But often in relationship questions where we're working further back in time, we're going to need to analyze and correlate evidence across multiple records. And then, of course, as we do that, invariably, we are going to come across conflicts. And we can't just ignore it, much as we would like to when something is not making sense. We have to resolve it somehow. And sometimes the resolution is simply that someone lied in a record, or that the clerk wrote it down wrong, or simply that people didn't remember correct dates or even names. But we do have to do something to resolve it. And then as we are writing this up, because if it's something difficult, we have to write it out, and then we do those accurate source citations for ourselves as much as for others, because we want to know where things came from. So let's take a look at some of the sources that I used in this little mini case study. And we will start with one, which is, well, actually, this is discussing a couple of different things, and I'll show you the image in just a minute. But we have a marriage between a David Irwin and a Sarah B. Royston. So on 6 February 1830, this couple applied for a marriage license from Morgan County. And on the very same day, we have Thomas B. Royston. Notice the similar surname. And he is serving as a trustee for Sarah, and they are both of Clark County. Now, Clark County does neighbor Morgan County, so it would be okay that they are applying for a license. Maybe David is from Morgan, and that's where he's applying, since the other two are from Clark. But Thomas is serving as a trustee in a marriage settlement protecting her property in anticipation of her marriage to this David Irwin. So apparently, she had more property than he did. And because when a woman in this time 1830s in America, married, her property all became that of her husband's. And so he wanted to, they drew up a form, and David lacked sufficient estate to provide an adequate jointure equivalent to Sarah's fortune. So he didn't have the same amount of property as she did. And the property was two enslaved boys, sadly, Isaac and Thomas. Well, John and Betsy Dawson witnessed this indenture, and then David and Sarah were married the next day in Clark County. Now, previous to finding this record, I had not found a record that connected or even had Sarah and Thomas in the same record. Because of their surname and their ages, I hypothesized that they were siblings. But finding this actual record gave me something a little bit more evidence, doesn't it? So you can see here some citations for both the marriage record and the mortgage book. And this is what that indenture looked like. You know, it's your typical handwritten document. It's on Family Search, it's image there. It was from a book, it was from a superior court, and it was called a mortgage. And it has, you know, the clerk has written it all out. We've got the witnesses, we've got everything here. So we would call this an original record, and it would be primary information for a lot of different things in here. The fact that Sarah owned or had been deeded these two boys, and the fact that Thomas is serving as her trustee. It does not state a relationship, however. There is no direct evidence in here that says, this is my sister or this is my brother. Nope, just his name there. So, this is a piece of indirect evidence. If my research question is, are Thomas and Sarah siblings? And there's other pieces of indirect evidence, such as these witnesses, John Dawson, Robert Cessna, Betsy Ann Dawson. So, you know, who are these people? Are they also close? And the research did show that, yes, they were. We're not going to talk about them today, though. So here's the marriage record, and you can see this is from a typical marriage book. This clerk had just beautiful handwriting. Look at those lovely letters that he used. But here we see that they did get married and, you know, married on 7 February, I believe, 1830, and it was recorded in April. So again, this would be an original record. They probably were handed a certificate themselves that they would keep, but we do not have that. It's not been handed down, you know, maybe just got lost through the years. So this is the most original record we have. And this one is pretty simple. If our research question is, who did Sarah Royston marry? Well, we've got direct evidence right there. She married David Irwin. So this could also be used as a bit of indirect evidence connecting it to the previous record where we are having that indenture and, you know, sort of a prenuptial agreement. So I don't know if it would really be indirect evidence for that, but it would be evidence that connects to that. It all connects together. Now, we have got another research question, and that is, who is the father of these two Roystons, Thomas and Sarah? And there was a land lottery record that talked about a John Royston's orphan. And this becomes a really important piece of the puzzle. So this was in 1827. This would be 3 years before that marriage. And we see that there was a fortunate drawer who was John Royston's orphan of Gaines District, Morgan County. So did your ears perk up when you saw Morgan County? Because that is where that marriage was taking place and very same surname. Well, this fortunate drawer was granted 202.5 acres in the 20th District, 1st County in Lee County, 1st Section, Lee County, Lot 18. So very specific here. We should be able to track this land. Now, because Thomas and Sarah both had ties to Morgan County and could have been considered the orphan, which one would it be? Well, this is where we have to go and learn a little bit more about the lottery and what was the specific requirement for that year. Georgia has several land lotteries, and every year they had these specific requirements. So let's take a look at the pieces of evidence that we have. First of all, we have two different sources for this. One is a derivative record. So this is published as a book. It's now been digitized, and it is a reprint of Official Register of Land Lottery of Georgia, 1827. So before these records were digitized, this was a very important record that you could consult to see if your ancestor was in this land lottery. And you can see that it has some really specific information. There's John Royston's orphan of Gaines Count District, Morgan, and there's the lot and section and so forth. Now, once you find a derivative, you always want to look for the original because who knows if this author, Miss Martha Lou Houston, if she could read every single bit. In this case, she was spot on, and her derivative record, her abstract, was exactly right. But I was able to find the actual record in a book, and it looks like I actually have got just the same citation there. So just ignore that because that's just a copy of that one. I actually do have a real citation in my log, but here we see that it is, yes, indeed, it's John Royston's orphan of Gaines District, Morgan County. So we've got the information, and this would be an original record. And who was the informant here? That's a question that we are not sure of. I would say it is primary information, and it's probably the informant would be the person who is bringing in the land lottery results. And so, this was original created soon after the event, and they probably took out, the names. People had to put their names and put them in a barrel, and then they would draw those out. So there was record keeping done at the time. I'm sure very careful record keeping, and that was brought in to use to create this record. So, this is one of those pieces. Would you say primary information? Would you say secondary? I would say primary. It's being recorded by the people who were doing the record keeping. But we do have to still think about what that lottery requirement was. And the most applicable was a family, one or two of orphans under 18 years whose father is dead, 3-year residence in the state, or since birth. And they get one draw. And so this makes us think that, okay, we look at this birth under 18 years. Well, Thomas is born 1806. Several sources agree with that. So that probably was not him. But Sarah was born in 1810, and she would have been 17 at the time of the lottery. So here you can see her headstone, and it's very specific that she is the wife of David Irwin, and we see that David became a judge. So apparently he brought his station up to match hers. She was born in Greene County, Georgia, which neighbors Morgan. It's right in the same area of Georgia, same county area. Born on September 2nd, 1810. So we have pretty specific, and all the censuses agree. She had several censuses from 1850 to her death, so 3. And they all agree. Actually, there would be 4, and they all agree on this date. So this looks good that she could be that orphan. Now, if she were the orphan and daughter of John, Thomas, in connecting to her through that indenture that we saw, does give us a piece of evidence that perhaps he is also the son of John Royston, if these are siblings. Now, we do have some conflicting evidence because John Royston was married to Polly Cessna. We have a marriage for them in 1803. But in 1814, she petitioned for and was granted a divorce. And this was a vinculo matrimony, which is a complete divorce, meaning that she would again become a single woman and she could buy and sell property. She could basically do all those things she couldn't do as a married woman. So she wanted to boot John Royston out of her life because he had not resided with her and their 3 small children for the last 6 years. So She gets married in 1803. Thomas is born about 1806, and then Sarah born 1810. Well, that might cause a bit of a conflict because if John had not resided with her for the last 6 years, that means since 1808, he'd been missing. So, was Sarah John's daughter? Is this actually accurate? This is a bit of conflicting evidence. So, here is what the record actually looks like. It is in a court book in Greene County, and here is um, the transcript of part of it, which is just kind of fun to look at. So we'll read a little bit of this. So we have Polly Royston, formerly Polly Sisney. So we have her maiden name. It's actually a previous marriage. On or about the day of February 18 and 3, your petitioner and her present husband, John Royson, were married. John hath totally withdrawn from your petitioner his love, esteem, confidence, and affection, hath for the last 6 years, without any kind of reason or provocation, withdrawn himself entirely from the bed and board of your petitioner, leaving her with 3 small children to support and educate without any kind of aid or assistance from him. He will never again live with your petitioner, or ever again perform the duties of a husband, and hath removed himself to parts entirely unknown to your petitioner. At the time of her intermarriage with the said John, she has good reason to believe from statements and reports that have since time come to her knowledge that the said John had another wife living in the state of either North or South Carolina. Well, he had had another wife, but she actually had died, and she was in South Carolina. So, this was just hearsay here. It wasn't quite right. Polly is the primary informant. She is the one that knows that he left. Did she remember exactly the dates that he left? Did he come back to father Sarah in between? We will never know. But this is something that we think about when we're trying to put all the pieces together. Now, that was in a court record book on the county level. What if that had burned in a courthouse fire or had gotten lost? Well, we also have a piece of evidence from a source because in Georgia at this time, all divorces had to be granted by the state, and it was the General Assembly of the state of Georgia. And so there is a record on the state level of all the different divorces that were granted on a certain day. Here it was passed in November, December 1816. So apparently, we had to have the Senate and the House of Representatives in General Assembly. They had to look at the petitions and then say, yep, the divorce is granted. And so there are several different couples that are listed in this record, and Polly Royston and John Royston, her husband, are among them. And we see that their marriage is completely dissolved and annulled. And here's the interesting thing. After some legalese, we learned that all the property, real and personal, that was brought into the family of either of the aforesaid female parties at the time of marriage, or did accrue in consequence of any such marriage, not already disposed of, shall, on the passage of this act, revert to and become the property separately of each and every of the several women herein contained. So, why would Polly want to drag her personal business through the courts, petition the state government? Well, she wants to be in charge of her property. She wants to get it back. She wants to be able to do whatever she wants with her property. And she was a person of property. They were in a class of people that owned land and were taxed for land, and were enslaved people were running plantations. So this was very important for her to get this back. So that's what we know about this divorce. Now, getting back to that land lottery, for a long time, I thought it was John who was the orphan until I did some more digging. And I was able to finally find the sale of that land lottery land. The reason it was so tricky to find the sale was because the county kept changing its name, kept getting rearranged, boundaries kept changing. So originally the land was in Lee County. that Lot 18, 20th District, first section. But then Lee County became Randolph County, which became Stewart County on December 1830. Now, remember what else happened in 1830? We have Sarah Royston marrying David Irwin. So now we have a new county to look at, Stewart. Lee County was a county that all the records were destroyed in a courthouse fire, so there was nothing there for me to find. But thankfully, Stewart County had all of its records. So I did find a sale of that exact piece of land by David Irwin. So at the time of the marriage to Sarah, that land that she had drawn a lot for became basically his, and he could sell it. So this was that tract or parcel of land, Situate, lying and being in the county of Stewart, but in the county of Lee at the time of the survey, known and distinguished by lot number 18 in the 20th district of said county, etc., etc. So this really provided some additional evidence. We have an original source of him selling this land, and we've got primary information that he is selling it. It's being recorded in the deed book, so it's all above board. And that helps us to connect Sarah as the orphan. So, a little bit about this idea of the femme covert. Under common law, when a couple married, the husband took control of the wife's property and she became a femme covert. She could not sell or lease property, enter into business, make a legally binding contract, or even write a will without a husband's consent. Sarah became a femme covert upon her marriage, and David had the right to sell any land in her possession, including her land grant. So, my preliminary conclusion was that if she were indeed the orphan of John Royston, this would make John her father and potentially Thomas's father as well, given their close association and a parent-sibling relationship. And then there is a lot more to the case that adds additional evidence. So we're not going to go into that, but I wanted to just show some of those things that we do with our sources. Once we find those and we analyze the type of source and we really look carefully at the informant and we pull together all the evidence. So, what did I do with all this? Well, I wrote a case study. This was several years of research. And honestly, I had started this research kind of from the beginning of my genealogy journey. And I did not keep research logs very well back in the day. I basically just documented what I found, but not what I didn't find. I didn't write it up. I just had all these ideas, swirling around in my head. So I finally decided to get this all written up as a case study. It has the things that you need, a source citations. Those conflicts are resolved. I resolved the conflict about Sarah's age just by showing the other evidence was so strong that she had to be the orphan with that deed, with her husband selling the land. There was no other there was no other explanation. And other pieces that pull together a tight family group using the fans, the friends, associates, and neighbors. One of the most difficult things was figuring out how to present and organize the evidence because there are several just very complicated sections. And so that was one of the most difficult things. But this is what our research reports can become when we've done several different iterations of our research and we finally think we have a good conclusion, then we can take all those reports with the citations already created and we have, already analyzed, we've come to good conclusions and we can put it into one case study, which is built upon our sources. There's nothing else we build on. It's our sources, our analysis, and the evidence that we pull from the information. So I hope that was helpful just to get a big picture and see what are we doing with all of this work in our research.